And we're recording. This is the Kubernetes SIG Network meeting of June 28th, 2018. Let's get started with the first item on the agenda, which is the SIG test review. I see a few people have put some details under that. Mr. Hahn, do you want to start us off by talking about the kubeproxy tests? Unless you're not here, in which case it looks like... Oh. Hello?
Is it really low?
Oh, it's really low.
Just give us 1 second.
I think it's...
That's better now. It's not too bad.
Better now, yeah.
How's that?
Hello?
That's okay.
Only okay.
Yeah, it's...
Marginal. We can understand you at least.
Wait. Okay, yeah.
Okay, let's speak loud. So basically, I debug the kubeproxy upgrade and downgrade test and found out the issue is so during the test, some of the kubeproxy just is not scheduled on some of the node, and turned out it's because during the node upgrade, the kubelet doesn't update the node label given by the node label flags, and it turned out that is an intended behavior because folks are trying to limit what the kubelet can do, so it cannot self-label anymore upon node upgrade. So I found the issue on open source, and I temporarily disabled the test given it's gonna fail if we're gonna fix the migration path.
Cool. So is this not a larger problem that we've...
Yeah, I will continue to investigate what would the proper fix for it, but it's not an issue for now because it's an alpha feature.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dan, it looks like you were looking into some of the kubeADM tests.
Yeah, it looks like it's an issue with Kubernetes Anywhere. It turns out that kubeADM's deb requires CRI tools, and it doesn't look like that's actually being installed or even attempted to be installed, even though it is pulled down to the nodes. And so that's what it looked like to me. I did a PR to actually install that where it looks like it should be installed. I don't know who gets to review and approve that one, although it looks like Tim has some of those powers. Hopefully somebody else does too. So, and it looked like that was the problem for all of the kubeADM tests. And it looks like this was an issue even after all of Dane's updates for some of the other packaging stuff. So who knows, maybe if this gets fixed, it'll be the last thing to actually make these guys turn green.
Sorry, I missed. Was there something that I need to do at this point?
I just need a reviewer for Kubernetes Anywhere pull 542.
Oh, okay. Is it assigned to me? If it's not assigned to me, I won't see it.
I cannot assign anything to Kubernetes Anywhere's repo.
Really? Okay.
I do not have permissions for that. So.
Okay, let me write down a note. Was it you said 542?
Yep, 542.
On Kubernetes Anywhere?
Yeah, it's literally we just want to attempt to install the CRI tools deb that is already pulled down to the host alongside kubelet, kubeADM, kubectl, and etc. because kubeADM's deb requires CRI tools, but nothing tries to install it.
Okay. Who at this point, who's the owners for Kubernetes Anywhere?
Heck if I know.
Okay.
It's a good question.
That's what I figured. All right, I'll take a look.
I mean, you were the last person to merge something about a month ago.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. So, I mean, I did notice some chatter on some other issues about people wanting to actually get rid of Kubernetes Anywhere. That said, we are still using it to run the kubeadm tests. So I'm not sure if we're still supposed to be running those tests or if they got replaced or should be replaced by something that doesn't use kube anywhere.
No, I think the goal is to phase out the need for it, but
Okay.
it's not done yet.
All right. Anyway, that's as far as I got with that one.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. I think there are a few other tests that are failing that we didn't talk about. So it looks like both of the core DNS and kube DNS performance tests.
Yes, here's Francois. So we will take care of those. We did it. There is let's say a framework issue because we run 10,000 headless service and it does not fit depending the way you start the test. But we know we troubleshoot already several weeks ago with scalability guys, and we know how to do. Except that when we knew it was already code freeze, so we did not push to fix that. But we started today, so in few days that will be okay.
Cool. Thanks for running with that. And then it looks like we also have the GC ingress tests have failed 53 times. Is anybody aware of those?
We are now.
5 days ago.
Isn't this this because of the main. Okay, I'll look into it. I'm not sure
It looks
why
like it's related to neg.
Yeah, the one that is pointing to the master is actually passing. So the one that is not, it's not. So
Because the image isn't updated.
Yeah, the image is not updated. So
Okay.
so basically the E2E tests are updated, but the image is not. So probably that's why the main one is failing. But the one that is pointing to the ingress master is actually passing. Okay, I'll fix that.
Cool. Thanks. I think that is it on the testing front. So that means next on the list is Ed, who wanted to talk about network service mesh.
Yeah, so, very much appreciate the opportunity you guys gave us to talk a little bit about the network service mesh stuff a couple of meetings ago. And one of the things that came out of some of the conversation on the mailing list was sort of the open question of, what's the right sort of formalism to plug into? Is it a SIG networking sub-project? Is it some kind of Kubernetes working group? Basically, we're just trying to figure out what makes sense and what would be sort of desirable from the community's point of view.
So working group, I think working group is the definition of cross-SIG collaboration, and we identified at least a couple other SIGs who were potentially interested in this, right?
Yeah, the IoT guys had some interest because they've got a similar set of problems, although they themselves are also a working group.
Yeah.
I mean, we have sort of the interesting place where there's lots of things that could be done productively along the way, and you sort of identified some of those when we were presenting it, but we were very light touch in the sense we don't actually need anything.
Sorry, Ed, you faded out there for a second.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So I was saying that there are lots of sort of interesting things that could be explored with various SIGs and working groups within Kubernetes that might be cool, but we sort of are light touch enough that we don't actually need any changes from the existing SIGs in order to function, which is a good thing, but it also makes the question a little more interesting.
Yeah, I don't think it changes the calculus. I think it's you still want a working group. We're actually in the sort of at the tail end of formalizing the working group creation process.
Cool.
But basically it comes down to a short doc that has a clear mission statement and a statement of what the goal of the group is. Like, what is the output artifact a group, of a working group. It's not code in the sense that working groups don't own code, SIGs do, but it could be a recommendation doc or a proposal or a set of API changes or something like that would be sort of the output artifact. So you can dig around. I don't know the exact path off the top of my head for the working group creation, or I can just find it for you and send you that PR. Why don't I just do that?
That would be perfect, thank you. I mean, we are producing quite a lot of code, actually, as it turns out, but again, we don't need any of that code to go into Kubernetes, and my understanding was that Kubernetes is seeking to make the core smaller and tighter, so this is sort of an alignment with the desire there.
It is. Producing code is not necessarily the same as getting code into, quote, quote, the project, and if it were to go into the project, whether that's in the main repo or in a associated repo, then we would decide which SIG owns it. I think it's pretty clearly it would be SIG Network that would own it, and that's fine. The goal of the working group, though, is to distribute information and reach consensus across the interested parties. That's all.
No, that sounds like a good fit then. And as I said, we're not trying to shove any code towards Kubernetes. If you guys decided you wanted it, we'd be ecstatic, but definitely not trying to push.
You got it. I'll send you the info this afternoon, I hope.
Many thanks.
Can you copy me on that too, Tim, since we may want to follow that process for the plumbing stuff?
You got it.
All right. Next on the list is Laszlo. Let's talk about SCTP.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Hello, everyone. So I was advised to bring this request to this forum. It is about SCTP supporting Kubernetes as a new layer 4 protocol. As you can see from my signature, I'm from Nokia. There are two other guys here as well from Nokia. We are a telecommunication company, as you know, so that's why SCTP is a kind of important for us as protocol. We use it among our services. And our original use case was that we would like to have our service instances to get into Kubernetes in order to be able to use DNS queries to find the peers. And it turned out, of course, a year ago or so that with SCTP is not possible. So we wrote this request. And then we were advised at that time that we should not limit SCTP support for headless services. So we should try to implement it for every possible service types. But it took a year, unfortunately. Now we have an initial pull request, and then we were told that we should bring the topic here, and we also wrote a Kubernetes enhancement proposal document for this purpose. Yeah, so that's why we are here.
Cool. So I think we should find a set of people to review that KEP.
So a bunch of people have started reviewing it already, myself included. There were some real concerns raised about the idea of kernel mode versus user mode. And honestly, that's a pretty major complicating factor that doesn't have any sort of precedent or examples to draw on from within the rest of Kubernetes. And that's a little worrisome to me.
Can you briefly tell the rest of us what that issue is?
The issue, let me see if I can summarize it, and you guys can tell me if I get it wrong. The issue is that there's two ways to consume SCTP. One's through the kernel interface and one's through user space. If you consume it through user space and then you load the kernel module for it, you can no longer consume it through user space. So if you have a job that wants user space SCTP and you have a job that wants kernel space SCTP, they can't use the same machine. Did I get it right?
Yep, exactly.
And we don't really have a mechanism that is there to sort of taint a machine that way. I say taint very specifically because we do in fact have taints, but we don't have a way of automatically detecting those sort of transient taints, and I'm not sure how transient they are, since kernel module unloading is actually not officially a supported thing. So basically, once you do that, the machine goes in one direction and one direction only until it's rebooted. That is a major complicating factor. Like, is there any way to structure this proposal that doesn't cover that?
Yeah, so the original ID did not include this user space stuff, but then in the pull request we got the indication that from other users of SCTP that they use actually user space SCTP, and this change once someone creates an SCTP service in Kubernetes, then of course it will trigger the IP tables or IPVS rule creation, which automatically loads the SCTP module into the kernel, and add that on every nodes, of course. And at the same time, the user space SCTP applications that run on this cluster will actually break. And that's why we included this aspect into our proposal or request, because actually I didn't feel that I myself can decide that it can be left out.
Right. So I have no personal experience with SCTP. I don't know why one would use it, and I don't know what the restrictions of it are. I think the important thing to ask here is how important are each of those two use cases? I think realistically we can support one. Like, if the proposal supported one and not the other, then we could actually get it merged. And as long as we're trying to support both, it's going to be a very long, painful process where I don't even really know. I don't have a mental model to think about it because we don't have anything else like it. Can we get some data or some even anecdotal data about how important each of those modes is?
At least in our company, so at least for me, it was the first time I've heard about user space SCTP. So in our use cases, in our products, we used kernel mode. But of course, it doesn't mean that on the worldwide, our use case is the most widespread.
Yeah, I can offer a tiny bit of color here, because we do have in VPP, which is a user space data plane, we do have stack support for SCTP. And in that case, the trick is actually having a full stack behind it. I think the problem you're describing happens when you try and sort of mix kernel mode and user space mode when part of your stack and user space is being provided by the kernel. Is that more or less correct?
Yeah, so once I've heard about this problem, in the scope of this request, I searched for it, of course, and then I found a lot of problem descriptions that was the root cause was that there was a user space SCTP user application. So on top of layer 3 up to layer 3 it was of course in kernel, and layer 4 started in the user space for SCTP, and after that suddenly it started dropping packets and sending abort messages on SCTP layer, and it turned out that some other process loaded the SCTP module because it started using the kernel mode, kernel part of SCTP.
Yeah, if I can make a suggestion, it might be worth trying to gather a little more information from the people who requested it, because one of the things that SCTP, most of the folks I know who are using SCTP these days are in the mobility world, networking-wise, and so they're looking at building VNFs of some sort. And I've heard a lot of rumblings from various people building VNFs about needing higher performance for various L4 protocols than they get out of the kernel, and therefore looking for user space stacks for that purpose. And so I think it gets back to the point Tim made earlier, which is we kind of need to get some sense of the prevalence here, because one way or the other might be doable. But it sounds like both is a problem.
Yeah, if both is required, then of course what we can first do as a first idea is to, copy the old solution that was before containers and Kubernetes, which means that nodes were dedicated for user space SCTP applications, and the other applications those were run on other machines. And of course, in case of Kubernetes, it means that the taint that you talked about, it should be used by the kube proxy itself.
Yeah, right. That's new.
That's the main headache. Yes.
That's something that's again without precedent, but doesn't seem irreconcilable to have sort of dedicated pools of equipment for user space. I wonder if there's other creative solutions with multiple IPs or multiple interfaces or some other way to distinguish apps that want to use user space and kernel space. I really have no experience. I have no test bed. I've never written an SCTP program. So I have to a little bit push it back on you guys and say, help me to find a way to make this doable.
Yeah. All right.
I have no fundamental problems with the idea. I just don't know how to make it work. As long as you're holding both requirements.
Yeah.
Did I hear earlier that the issue is really due to the, in some sense, incomplete nature of the user space implementation? And if it were more complete, the presence or absence of the kernel version would be irrelevant?
Yeah, so I think that the trick there is, I made a comment there because we do have it implemented in VPP. We take sort of a very different approach than riding on top of the kernel L2 and L3 stack, because we have a faster stack for L2 and L3 than the kernel does. I do know that there are user space stacks for TCP that do not seem to have this problem with coexisting with the kernel TCP stack. That's not the way we do it in VPP, but I'm aware of other stacks that don't have this issue. I wonder if it might not be considered a bug in the kernel SCTP implementation that it's so aggressive that it precludes that.
Or might the bug be in the user space, that it's somehow sensitive?
I think, Laszlo, correct me if I'm wrong, the real problem is that if you load the SCTP kernel module at all, and someone tries to speak SCTP, which has a unique IP protocol number, that effectively the SCTP stack grabs it and makes it inaccessible for anyone who were to, say, open a raw socket on an interface to get it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, wouldn't that be the same story for TCP?
But the point I was making is that it appears to not be the same story for TCP, because I know of many TCP user space stacks that do not have this problem, because the TCP stack is not so aggressive.
Right, but it is still one protocol number. So, okay, so right.
If you're going through a raw socket, nothing in the kernel should be parsing that protocol field, right?
That's kind of what I'm getting at, exactly. Yeah, and so if something is, that seems like a bug in the kernel implementation of SCTP.
I could buy that. I wonder if there's any literature or bugs or anything else filed about this.
Yeah, that I don't know.
Yeah, what I've found is just the solution that you should not do this. to run the same to run the things on the same node, same machine.
So it's tough because. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so the problem description was something like that. If you load the kernel module as well, then it also grabs the packets, and then it just says that it is not recognizable for me. It's not an SCTP connection or association that I know, so it sends an abort automatically, and that way it just ruins the existing connection of the user land SCTP application.
Right. So I mean that smells like a bug to me, but it's not surprising that nobody knows, because in 20 years I've never used SCTP. So it's probably a very niche group of people who have all individually worked around it and don't actually care to fix it, right? But it might be worthwhile to have a conversation with somebody in kernel land, Linux kernel land, who understands this area, on the NetDev mailing list or something.
I have a question for the people who are using the user space. They would still want to use the Kubernetes description in terms of the service, as STP, et cetera. They just don't want probably kubeproxy involved. Is that, like, because kubeproxy can't be involved if it's a user space.
We walked this line, that how we could solve that in this case, for these applications on those nodes, the kube proxy would run a kind of user space proxy as it does currently for TCP or UDP, if requested.
Right.
So, of course, because there are user space SCTP stacks, it is possible to put it into a kube proxy, so it can start working like that. The problem comes when you would like to direct the traffic from the cluster IP to this userland SCTP stack, because currently IP tables rules and IPVS rules are used for that, as I understand, on the node. Now, if in IP tables we enter the protocol like SCTP, then it loads the kernel module, which is wrong, bad. So what we have to do then is that we have to solve this purely based on IP addresses. So anything sent to that cluster IP, it will be sent up or sent to the IP address where this userland SCTP stack listens. But of course, it means that this service that got this cluster IP, it cannot support anything else but SCTP. So it cannot be TCP or UDP. So that's a limit. That will be a limitation, kind of limitation.
Because we couldn't do any port remapping or anything.
Yeah.
I see. That would be good to call out in that doc.
I think it was in there.
In the API section.
I at least I tried. I tried to.
Well, I remember that from the doc. I had forgotten that little detail, but once you said it, I remembered.
I see.
But I'm really not keen on putting a user space packet copier back into kubeproxy.
Mm-hmm.
So
given that we also, it's like the back end is like IPVS, IP tables. Now it's like IPVS plus
yes,
this extra little thing on the side.
Right. And even like all those limitations I could sort of maybe live with because networking is crazy and just the truth of it. It's this user space, kernel space incompatibility. So I guess.
So Tim, those of us who are practitioners of the art prefer creative to crazy.
Okay.
Which is not to disagree with
whatever pronoun you like, Ed. So I feel like we've come in a circle. So Laszlo, I'll throw it back to you and say, if you can help simplify this proposal, then I'd be happy to come back and try to find a way to make it go through. The most obvious simplification seems to either be make them work together, as in file a kernel bug and get it fixed, or find a way to just say we're not going to do user space, or if you're going to do user space, you have to segregate your machines, and here's how to do that. And then we just leave it as a documentum for those people.
Although, does that have an impact on the API with respect to
that's a good question.
The port remapping? That was my question. Or the lack thereof.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, we could the broadest brush we could paint this with is user space SCTP is out of scope, and if you want to do that, you're on your own. Have fun. But I don't know if that's 80% of SCTP users, then maybe we shouldn't do that. If that's 10% of SCTP users, then I feel less bad about it, and I have no data to indicate whether which of those cases it is.
Yeah, and my counsel would be to investigate more closely, because again, the two data points I have are most of the people I know who care about SCTP in the modern world are in mobility and looking at NFT stuff for 5G. And I do know on the TCP host stack side, a lot of people looking to build VNFs are looking for alternatives to the kernel stack for performance reasons. None of those actually directly connect up to anything meaningful. It's just hinting that there's more data to be found.
Okay. All right, so Laszlo, ball's in your court.
Sorry?
The ball is in your court.
Oh, okay, that's all right.
Can you put I was trying to read some of the issues surrounding it, the kernel versus user space bits. Do you happen to know which comment is a simple explanation of it? Or is there a simple explanation that you could add of the issue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will.
I know Tim had one, but I forgot the exact wording.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my wording was basically you can't use kernel and user space at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I was just talking to one of our networking people internally who does some work with SCTP and trying to figure out what he thought about it. So if I had a good, succinct description of the problem, maybe I could forward that on and see if I can get a reply.
Okay, cool. Laszlo, can you work that out?
Yep.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We got one more item on the agenda, which is about PodReady++ and network policy.
Right. So I discussed this a little bit on the mailing list. I know, Casey, you've been nervous about, is Casey here?
Yep.
This is Casey. Right. So you've been nervous about the idea of implementing it because, well, specifically the issue is how network policy, whether network policy contributes to PodReady++ or not. And if so, how, it sounds very expensive the way we've defined it. The issue is that because, the definition that we've been bandying about is a very complete one. And since filtering on either side of a connection contributes to the readiness of both pods on either side of that connection, you have to go around and gather a lot of information before you actually know that a given pod is ready. And so, I'm trying to figure out, does anybody care to try to implement a network policy contribution to PodReady++? And if so, what do they intend to do? And on the other side of the coin, does anybody feel like they need it? Does any consumer of PodReady++ feel it's important to take network policy into account?
So I can talk a little bit to this. We've done some brief thinking about how we might do this for Calico. And that's part of why I was a little bit concerned about the trade-off that you kind of touched on, which is the more complete you try to make the readiness assertion, the more FUD I start to feel about how it performs in 1,000 or 2,000 node cluster with hundreds of thousands of pods. So yeah, there's certainly some worry there. I think there's, it's not like an impossible task to tackle. We could implement it, but I don't know that we've had any users complaining about this, but it's also one of those things that's kind of tricky to nail down, right? Because it can manifest as a sort of unclear network transient error.
Yeah, that's sort of my feeling there is the manifestation of this would be really hard to detect when it doesn't work. Is there anybody who's doing network policy in sort of a non-fast way? Like, we sort of get away without this because the propagation within a single cluster and IP tables programming is reasonably quick, and so it's not that big of a deal. But I'd be curious to sort of echo Mike's question. Is anybody out there actually planning on a network policy implementation that is based on something that has like whole second programming latency?
We have some of that with OVN Kubernetes, but that's mainly because of a few reasons that we are working to reduce and can reduce. And that's mostly because of the way that events are delivered via for Kubernetes, that, like the namespace events are different from the pod events and things like that. And it could be a few seconds or something like that before things actually work out, because you have to propagate those events all over the cluster and then make some local changes. But again, that's something that we're working to reduce the time on that. So hopefully we can get it down to like less than a second or something like that. But I can imagine that if you had a large cluster and some nodes are running a little bit behind in the event stream because there maybe were a lot of events, that you might not get the necessary events for network policy before the container came up.
Yeah, I mean, I see the concern with there. I don't have any working example of it though.
Right, but as you say, it's a little tough to say that it hasn't happened or won't happen.
That's also true.
There is an argument that someone made earlier, I forget who, it might have been you, that with a little bit of care, we can call this an advantage rather than a disadvantage. That is to say, first off, if the, let's see, yes, so in network policy, there's the only blacklisting is the implicit blacklisting at the empty, non-empty discontinuity. And that's not something that needs to propagate fast. So the only thing that needs to propagate fast is the whitelisting. And if there is a brief outage of what's allowed, that's stuff that everything has to deal with anyway. And so not only would nobody notice, but nobody would really care.
I mean, I like the argument on its face. I'm concerned about the same sort of rolling update issue that we have today with load balancers. Like, let's imagine a pathological network policy implementation that takes 30 seconds to update the firewalling in Fabric. In that case, if it's not participating in network policy, then you could start the rolling update, you'd see ready, and you'd blast through your entire deployment before policy had been enabled for even one replica. Is it a huge deal? For external facing stuff, it is. Fortunately, external facing stuff isn't subject to network policy, right? So not that huge a deal. From the inside, it would just appear as a brief outage, and hopefully people's applications are resilient to that, but I prefer not to make accidental chaos monkeys. But I guess in that case, I mean, I'm imagining a model where the firewalling is centralized, and in that case, it could participate in Ready++ because it doesn't have to do sort of the both ends testing. So it's probably not that huge a deal for that sort of environment. So I guess I'm asking if anybody's got a sort of double-ended environment where the latency matters.
Also, it occurs to me that if you have a more centralized mechanism, then you can always block the pod from even returning networking readiness. I mean, from returning from the CNI call for add until you're sure that most things are ready. Wouldn't this only be a problem where you have a much more distributed system where you may not?
No, because you can't. If you block the return from CNI, then the IP address never gets populated in the pod, and therefore you can't actually kick the rest of the process off. Right? That's fundamentally a part of Ready++, is we wanted to hijack Ready, but we can't hijack Ready because without Ready, we're not ready.
Right, but the other observation, right, but the other observation still rules. With a centralized implementation, you don't have this terribly expensive problem of figuring out when it's ready.
And maybe it's enough to say for now we don't have any example of this, and if we did, focusing on the receiving side is maybe enough.
Well, it's technically, since we have rules in both directions, it would be the local side rather than the receiving side.
Sure. Okay. Okay. So I don't think that answers your question, but does it sort of address the concern?
Well, I was going to suggest that maybe one answer is that we settle for making the network policy contribution to pod ready concern only the local filtering and not the remote filtering. But again, it was based on the sort of argument that I was saying earlier. If the only gap is slow whitelisting, then that's going to be okay. And you're saying you don't really buy that, so I guess I don't have an argument still.
Well, the pod readiness plus doesn't mandate anything about network policy, right? It's a more general
Absolutely.
concept, so
that's what I'm trying to figure out. Is anybody actually planning to have it? A network policy contribution,
right?
And or is anybody asking for it? There's two sides of this.
So I've heard people who wanted to do firewall, like Fabric firewall based implementations. I don't know if those have programming latency issues or not. They're not here on the call. I would presume they would be similar to load balancers. So probably they would have those issues, but they're centralized. I mean, we could emulate this by taking Calico and throwing a sleep 10 in before you write your and we'd certainly see the problem. I'm not sure that that would do anything but confirm the fact that we suspect this exists.
Exactly, right. The question is, does anybody, again, it's a two-sided question, right? Does anybody actually need this, and is anybody planning to supply it?
It sounds like for the time being, the answer is no, and we'll see in a year if we were wrong.
Casey,
Yeah, it's not on our immediate plans to do because we haven't heard of anybody who's hitting issues with it. As soon as we hear somebody that wants it, then I think we can implement something on that spectrum of completeness. Where
right. Well, yeah, I mean,
practice,
I think it'll be
local is probably enough.
Exactly. Local was cheap. That's clear. And if you include the remote, for you guys, it's not going to scale, just like for everybody else, it's not going to scale.
Right. Okay. I guess I'm satisfied with that for the time being.
That sounds like it's all we've got. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Always trouble you.
Well, I think that is all on our agenda, unless there are any last-minute additions.
Are we having a meeting in 2 weeks? That's the 4th of July week, right?
No, that's the week after. Next week's 4th.
Oh, okay. Cool.
All right, there was a question of whether we'd have a plumbing meeting next week or not. I may punt that one.
Time catches up with me. Okay, cool. I would like to propose that the main focus of 2 weeks from now be other work that people want to get done in this next cycle, unless there's other people who want to talk about that stuff now. Like, there's been a few KEPs that have crossed my radar, and there's a bunch of open proposals that I'd like to be able to circle back to if we can. But like everything, they all need stewards, and without stewards, they're just not going to make progress. I know the dual stack KEP has floated by, and I had a lot of comments on that KEP, but overall I think it seems sound. Let's make the topic of 2 weeks be, what do we want to shoot for in 112? Or is that too long? Should we just take it to mailing list instead?
I think it would be great to get started on the mailing list, and if we don't have a concrete set of goals by 2 weeks, we can use the meeting to finish it off.
Okay. So anybody here who feels like you have stuff that you want to push for in 112, let's see a KEP or a pre-KEP or a proposal or something on the mailing list ASAP.
Is something like adding more sandbox states, would that need a KEP?
What does sandbox state mean?
CRI sandbox state.
I would say, yeah, I don't know, do you feel like you understand the problem enough to make a proposal?
Yes.
Then KEP is probably the right form for it.
Okay. I mean, the problem is that we don't have a sandbox state starting. There's just ready or not ready. And if the network plugin takes a short amount of time, then the plague loop can fire and assumes that the sandbox is not actually running while it's being constructed, and then kills it and starts a new one.
Okay, that sounds reasonably legitimate. Make your KEP.
Okay.
And make sure you copy in Uju or somebody from SIG Node.
Yeah, it's sort of more of a SIG Node problem for this. Network is only tangentially affected.
Right. Okay.
All right.
We all get 10 minutes back?
Yeah, 11 even.
Sweet. Thanks, everyone.
See you all on the mailing list.
Thanks. Bye.
Congratulations on 111 to everybody who got their stuff merged in, by the way. It was a good release. Thanks.